From 2015 to early 2018, Chris Watts, a 30-year-old oil field operator in Frederick, Colorado, seemed to lead an ideal life with his wife Shanann and their two daughters, Bella and Celeste. Sarah Watts, Chris's sister, started noticing cracks in their marriage during this time. Detective Michael Brooks would later investigate the family after a devastating crime. Laura Bennett, a journalist, would cover the story as it unfolded, revealing the dark truth behind the Watts family's perfect image, a truth that would leave a lasting impact on everyone involved. Sarah had always been close to her brother Chris. They grew up together in North Carolina, sharing a childhood filled with memories that kept them connected even after Chris moved to Colorado in 2012 to marry Shanann. Sarah liked Shanann, but never felt a deep connection with her. By 2015, when Chris and Shanann welcomed their first daughter, Bella, Sarah traveled to Colorado to celebrate. She noticed tension between the couple, despite the joyful occasion. Shanann frequently posted about their happy life on social media, sharing photos and updates that painted a flawless picture. Sarah sensed something off during her visits, especially as Chris seemed more reserved than usual. She couldn't pinpoint the issue, but her unease grew over the years, setting the stage for a tragedy she never could have imagined. In 2017, Chris and Shanann had their second daughter, Celeste, and moved into a large home in Frederick. Shanann showcased their house online, filling her social media with images of their growing family. Sarah visited that year, hoping to reconnect with her brother. The home felt colder than the warm scenes Shanann posted, and Chris appeared distant, often distracted during conversations. Sarah wondered if the pressures of family life were taking a toll, but she didn't press him. By early 2018, Shanann announced she was pregnant with their third child, a boy they named Nico. Sarah hoped the new baby would bring Chris and Shanann closer, but her optimism faded as she observed Chris's lack of excitement, a sign that their marriage was under more strain than she realized. Michael had been a detective with the Frederick Police Department since 2010, working to keep the small town safe. His days typically involved routine calls, traffic incidents, minor disputes, nothing out of the ordinary. In the evenings, he spent time with his family, a reminder of why his job mattered. He first heard about the Watts family in 2017 through a colleague who mentioned Shanann's active social media presence. Shanann worked with Thrive, a multi-level marketing company, and often shared updates about her family online. Michael didn't think much of it at the time, filing the information away as a minor detail about a local family. He had no reason to suspect anything unusual, but that would change in the coming months when a missing persons report would land on his desk, pulling him into the most challenging case of his career. In early 2018, Michael remained unaware of the storm brewing in the Watts household. His focus was on his current cases, none of which involved the family. He occasionally saw Shanann's posts through mutual acquaintances on social media, noting how she portrayed a picture-perfect life. The reality was far different, something he would discover later that year. His role as a detective would soon shift from routine patrols to leading an investigation that would uncover a horrifying crime, one that would test his skills and leave a permanent mark on his career. For now, the Watts family was just another name in Frederick, a town that seemed quiet until everything changed. Laura had been a journalist at the Denver Post since 2014, covering local news and human interest stories in Colorado. Her work often focused on families, which led her to the Watts family in 2017. She wrote a feature on Shanann's success with Thrive, highlighting her dedication as a mother and entrepreneur. Shanann's social media presence caught Laura's attention. Endless posts of smiling children, a loving husband, and a beautiful home. Laura admired Shanann's energy, but couldn't help wondering if there was more to the story. She included a few reader comments in her article, some of which hinted at marital tension, though there was no concrete evidence at the time. Laura kept the Watts family in mind, sensing there might be a deeper story to tell. By early 2018, Laura noticed more comments on Shanann's posts, some questioning the dynamics in the family. A few followers pointed out Chris's absence in recent updates, while others speculated about arguments behind the scenes. Laura didn't have enough to write a follow-up story, but she saved the information, planning to revisit it later. Her instincts told her something wasn't right, a feeling that would prove correct when the Watts family became the center of a national news story later that year. As a journalist, Laura would play a key role in sharing the truth with the public, a truth that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the family she had once written about. In early 2018, Chris Watts and his family appeared to be living a dream life in Frederick, a dream that Shanann carefully curated online. Sarah saw the strain in her brother's marriage, though she couldn't imagine how far it would go. Michael remained unaware of the family's struggles, his focus elsewhere until a crime would pull him in. Laura had her suspicions but lacked the evidence to dig deeper, a task she would take up soon enough. The Watts family was on the brink of collapse, a collapse that would expose a devastating reality, leaving Sarah, Michael, and Laura to navigate the aftermath of a tragedy that would change their lives forever. From early 2018 to August 13, 2018, Chris Watts' life in Frederick, Colorado, spiraled into chaos as his marriage to Shanann deteriorated under the strain of his affair with Nicole Kessinger. Sarah Watts, Chris's sister, sensed the growing rift between the couple during her visits. Detective Michael Brooks, who would soon lead the investigation into their disappearance, remained unaware of the family's struggles at this point. Laura Bennett, a journalist, began noticing subtle hints of trouble through Shanann's social media activity. The tension culminated in a horrific act on August 13, 2018, when Chris murdered Shanann, who was 15 weeks pregnant with their son Nico, and their daughters Bella and Celeste, a crime that would unravel the facade of their perfect family life. Sarah had been concerned about Chris and Shanann's relationship for months. By early 2018, she noticed during her visits to their Frederick home that Chris seemed increasingly detached. He often avoided conversations with Shanann, focusing instead on his phone or stepping away to take calls. Shanann, meanwhile, was busy with her work for Thrive, a multi-level marketing company, and frequently posted updates online about their family. Her posts showed a happy household, but Sarah felt the disconnect in person. In June 2018, Chris started working closely with Nicole Kessinger, a co-worker at Anadarko Petroleum, where he was employed as an oil field operator. Their relationship quickly turned romantic, a development Sarah didn't know about but would later piece together as a key factor in the tragedy. In July 2018, the Watts family took a trip to North Carolina to visit relatives, including Sarah. She hoped the time together would help Chris and Shanann reconnect, especially with Shanann's pregnancy progressing. Instead, the trip highlighted their issues. Chris spent most of his time texting, barely engaging with Shanann or their daughters Bella and Celeste. Shanann confided in Sarah about feeling overwhelmed, mentioning that Chris had been distant for weeks. Sarah encouraged her to talk to him, but Shanann admitted they hadn't had a real conversation in months. Sarah left the trip feeling uneasy, sensing that her brother was hiding something, though she couldn't imagine the extent of his betrayal or the violence that would follow. On August 9, 2018, Shanann returned from a business trip in Arizona, a trip that left her physically drained. She had been working hard to provide for the family through Thrive, often traveling for events while managing her pregnancy and caring for Bella and Celeste. Chris, however, showed little interest in her return, a fact that Sarah learned about through a phone call with Shanann later that day. Shanann told Sarah she felt like Chris didn't care anymore, mentioning a recent argument about their finances and her suspicions that he might be seeing someone else. Sarah tried to reassure her, suggesting they seek counseling, but she could hear the exhaustion in Shanann's voice. That conversation would haunt Sarah in the days to come, as it was one of the last times she spoke to her sister-in-law. The tension reached its peak on the night of August 12, 2018. Shanann arrived home at 1:48 a.m. after her flight, a moment captured by the couple's doorbell camera. She was tired and hoped to rest, unaware that Chris had already made a deadly decision. In the early hours of August 13, 2018, Chris and Shanann had a brief argument in their bedroom. According to Chris's later confession, Shanann confronted him about their failing marriage, asking if he wanted a divorce. Instead of answering, Chris strangled her, an act that took just minutes but ended her life and that of their unborn son, Nico. Sarah would later learn the details of that night, struggling to reconcile the brother she thought she knew with the man who committed such a heinous act. Chris's actions didn't stop with Shanann's murder. After killing her, he turned to his daughters, Bella, who was 4, and Celeste, who was 3. He smothered both girls in their beds, showing no hesitation as he ended their lives. Sarah would never understand how Chris could harm his own children, the girls she had watched grow up during her visits, the girls she had loved as her own nieces. Chris then loaded Shanann's body into the back of his truck, placing her on the floorboard. He put Bella and Celeste's bodies in the front seat, their small forms wrapped in blankets, and drove to a remote oil field where he worked, a site called Survey 319. There, he buried Shanann in a shallow grave and dumped Bella and Celeste's bodies into separate oil tanks, a disposal method that would later be uncovered as part of the investigation. Michael had no knowledge of the Watts family's struggles in early 2018. His work at the Frederick Police Department focused on routine matters. He spent his days handling minor cases, traffic violations, small thefts, nothing that hinted at the storm about to hit the town. In the evenings, he returned home to his family, a grounding force that kept him focused on his role as a detective. He had seen Shanann's social media posts through mutual acquaintances, noting her frequent updates about her family and her work with Thrive. To him, the Watts family seemed like any other in Frederick, a small community where major crimes were rare. That perception would change dramatically in just a few months, when a missing persons report would thrust him into the center of a case that would dominate his career. On August 12, 2018, Michael was off duty, spending the day with his family, unaware that a tragedy was unfolding across town. He had no reason to suspect anything about the Watts family, a family he had only heard of in passing. The next morning, however, he would receive a call that would change everything, a call reporting Shanann and her daughters missing, a call that would launch one of the most high-profile investigations of his career. The details of that night, Chris's calculated actions, the murders of his wife and children, and the disposal of their bodies, would come to light soon enough, leaving Michael to piece together a crime that would shock the nation and demand justice for the victims. Laura had been keeping an eye on the Watts family throughout 2018, her role at the Denver Post giving her insight into local stories. She had written about Shanann's success with Thrive earlier that year, noting her dedication as a mother and entrepreneur. Shanann's social media posts continued to paint a picture of a happy family, but Laura noticed a shift in the comments. Some followers questioned Chris's absence in recent photos, while others speculated about tension in the marriage. Laura didn't have enough to write a follow-up story, but she kept the information in mind, sensing that there might be more to uncover. Her instincts would prove correct, though she couldn't have predicted the scale of the tragedy that would soon unfold. On August 12, 2018, Laura was working on a different story, unaware that the Watts family was about to become the focus of her reporting. She had seen Shanann's post about her Arizona trip, noting how tired Shanann looked in the accompanying photo. Laura planned to reach out to Shanann for a follow-up interview about balancing motherhood and work, a piece she thought might resonate with her readers. That plan would never come to fruition. The next day, Laura would learn of Shanann and her daughter's disappearance, a story that would dominate her work for months. As the details emerged, Chris's affair, the murders, and the disposal of the bodies, Laura would dedicate herself to reporting the truth, ensuring the victim's story was told with the respect they deserved. By the morning of August 13, 2018, Chris Watts had committed an unthinkable crime, ending the lives of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and unborn Nico. Sarah was left to grapple with the loss of her sister-in-law and nieces, a loss she couldn't yet comprehend. Michael would soon be called to investigate, his role shifting from routine police work to a high-stakes murder case. Laura would cover the story as it unfolded, bringing the facts to a public desperate for answers. The Watts family, once a symbol of perfection in Frederick, had been destroyed by Chris's actions, setting the stage for a reckoning that would reveal the full extent of his deception. From August 13, 2018 to September 2018, the disappearance of Shanann Watts and her daughters, Bella and Celeste, sent shockwaves through Frederick, Colorado. Sarah Watts grappled with the sudden loss of her sister-in-law and nieces, unaware of her brother Chris's involvement. Detective Michael Brooks launched a high-stakes investigation that quickly turned into a murder case. Laura Bennett, a journalist, covered the unfolding story, bringing the public's attention to the tragedy. The discovery of the bodies and Chris's arrest revealed the horrifying truth, a truth that Sarah struggled to accept, a truth that Michael uncovered, a truth that Laura reported, marking a pivotal moment in the Watts family saga. Sarah woke up on August 13, 2018, to a frantic call from Shanann's friend Nicole Atkinson, who had been trying to reach Shanann all morning. Nicole explained that Shanann had missed a doctor's appointment for her pregnancy and wasn't answering her phone, which was unusual given how responsible she was. Sarah's stomach dropped as she listened, immediately calling Chris to find out what was happening. Chris told her he didn't know where Shanann was, claiming she had left early that morning after an argument, possibly to visit a friend. Sarah found his explanation odd, as Shanann wouldn't leave without telling anyone, especially not with Bella and Celeste. She urged Chris to call the police, a suggestion he hesitated on, which only deepened her unease. By midday, Sarah drove to Frederick from her home in Denver, desperate to help search for Shanann and the girls, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. When Sarah arrived at the Watts' home, she found Nicole already there, along with a few officers from the Frederick Police Department. The house was eerily quiet, with Shanann's car still in the garage and her purse, phone, and the girls' belongings inside. Sarah walked through the rooms, calling out for Bella and Celeste, hoping they were hiding somewhere, but there was no response. She noticed Chris's demeanor. He seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact and giving vague answers to the officers' questions. Sarah wanted to believe her brother, but his behavior didn't add up. Later that afternoon, Chris agreed to a local news interview, pleading for Shanann and the girls to come home, claiming he just wanted his family back. Sarah stood beside him, tears in her eyes, but she couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that Chris knew more than he was letting on, a suspicion that would soon be confirmed in the worst way possible. Michael received the missing persons report on August 13, 2018, shortly after Nicole contacted the Frederick Police Department. He arrived at the Watts' home around 2 p.m., taking in the scene as he spoke with Nicole and Sarah. The presence of Shanann's car and belongings immediately raised red flags, suggesting she hadn't left voluntarily. Michael questioned Chris, who repeated the same story he had told Sarah. Shanann left after an argument, possibly to visit a friend. Michael noted Chris's lack of emotion, a stark contrast to Sarah's visible distress. He requested access to the home's security footage, which showed Shanann arriving at 1:48 a.m., but no evidence of her leaving later that morning. Chris's truck, however, was seen backing into the garage at 5:27 a.m., a detail that caught Michael's attention, as it suggested Chris might have loaded something, or someone, into the vehicle before leaving for work. By August 14, 2018, Michael's investigation intensified. He obtained a search warrant for the house and coordinated with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation for additional support. Drones and K-9 units were deployed to search the area, focusing on nearby fields and reservoirs. Michael also tracked Chris's movements using GPS data from his work truck, which led him to Survey 319, an oil field site where Chris had gone on the morning of August 13th. That same day, Chris took a polygraph test at the police station, a test he failed miserably. Michael confronted him with the results, pressing him for the truth. After hours of questioning, Chris admitted to killing Shanann, claiming it was a spur-of-the-moment act after she threatened to take the kids away. He said Bella and Celeste were still alive, alleging Shanann had smothered them in a rage, a story Michael didn't believe but used to keep Chris talking. Chris then revealed where the bodies were, directing authorities to Survey 319, where Shanann was buried in a shallow grave and the girls' bodies were found inside oil tanks, a discovery that confirmed the case had shifted from a disappearance to a triple homicide. On August 15, 2018, Michael arrested Chris on suspicion of murder, a moment that marked the beginning of a long legal process. The recovery of the bodies was a grueling task, with investigators working through the night to extract Bella and Celeste from the oil tanks, their small forms preserved in crude oil. Michael stood at the site, his jaw clenched, as he processed the brutality of the crime. He had seen many cases in his career, but the murder of 2 young children by their own father was beyond comprehension. Back at the station, Chris provided a partial confession, sticking to his claim that Shanann had killed the girls, a lie that Michael saw through immediately. The evidence, security footage, GPS data, and the polygraph results pointed to Chris as the sole perpetrator, a conclusion that would be solidified in the coming weeks as more details emerged. Laura learned of Shanann and the girls' disappearance on the morning of August 13, 2018, through a tip from a colleague at the Denver Post. She had written about the Watts family earlier that year, focusing on Shanann's success with Thrive, and the news hit her hard. She drove to Frederick that afternoon, arriving just as Chris was giving his news interview. Laura watched from the crowd, noting his lack of emotion, a detail she included in her first article about the case, published later that day. The story quickly gained traction, with readers across Colorado following the search for Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. Laura interviewed neighbors and friends, including Nicole, who shared her concerns about Chris's behavior, providing Laura with valuable context for her reporting. By August 16, 2018, Laura broke the news of the body's discovery, her article detailing the grim findings at Survey 319 and Chris's arrest. She described the shallow grave where Shanann was found, along with the oil tanks containing Bella and Celeste, a detail that horrified her readers. Laura also reported on Chris's initial confession, noting his claim that Shanann had killed the girls, a statement that investigators were already questioning. Her coverage brought national attention to the case, with outlets across the country picking up the story. Laura spent long hours at her desk, sifting through tips from readers and updates from the police, determined to keep the public informed while honoring the memory of Shanann and her daughters. The case was no longer just a story for her. It was a mission to ensure the truth came to light, a truth that would hold Chris accountable for his actions. By September 2018, the investigation had revealed the full scope of Chris's crime, with evidence mounting against him. Sarah attended a memorial service for Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, held in North Carolina, where she broke down as she said goodbye to her sister-in-law and nieces. She couldn't bring herself to speak to Chris, who was now in jail awaiting charges, his lies exposed by the investigation. Michael continued to build the case, working with prosecutors to ensure Chris faced justice, a process that would unfold in the coming months. Laura's reporting kept the public engaged, her articles providing a detailed timeline of the events, from the disappearance to the arrest, a timeline that would serve as a foundation for understanding the tragedy that had unfolded in Frederick. From September 2018 to December 2018, the legal process against Chris Watts unfolded in Frederick, Colorado, bringing a sense of closure to a grieving community. Sarah Watts faced the painful reality of her brother's guilt as he confessed to the murders of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and unborn Nico. Detective Michael Brooks worked with prosecutors to secure a conviction, ensuring Chris would pay for his crimes. Laura Bennett continued her coverage for the Denver Post, detailing the court proceedings and Chris's admissions, keeping the public informed about the case's resolution. The plea deal and sentencing marked the end of a chapter, but the impact of the tragedy lingered for Sarah, Michael, and Laura as they each processed the truth behind the Watts family murders. Sarah had been struggling with her brother's arrest since August 2018, the weight of his actions pressing down on her as she tried to support her family in the aftermath. In early September, she learned from news reports that Chris had been formally charged with multiple counts, including 3 counts of first-degree murder for Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy for Nico, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. The charges confirmed what Sarah had feared. Chris was responsible for the entire crime, not just Shanann's death, as he initially claimed. She couldn't bring herself to visit him in jail, the image of Bella and Celeste haunting her every time she thought about what he had done. Instead, she focused on helping Shanann's family, particularly her parents, Frank and Sandra Rzusek, who were devastated by the loss of their daughter and granddaughters. On October 2, 2018, Sarah received a call from her parents, who had spoken with Chris's lawyers. They told her that Chris was considering a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, a decision that would spare the family a lengthy trial. Sarah felt conflicted. She wanted Chris to face the full consequences of his actions, but she also understood the toll a trial would take on everyone, especially Shanann's family. On November 6, 2018, Chris pleaded guilty to all charges as part of the plea agreement, a moment that Sarah watched unfold on the news from her home in Denver. The courtroom footage showed Chris standing silently as the judge accepted his plea, his face expressionless, a stark contrast to the emotional statements made by Shanann's family. Sarah broke down as Frank read a victim impact statement, describing the pain of losing his daughter and granddaughters, a pain Sarah shared but felt she had no right to express, given her brother's role in the tragedy. On November 19, 2018, Sarah attended Chris's sentencing hearing at the Weld County Courthouse, a decision she made to support Shanann's family, despite the difficulty of facing her brother. The judge sentenced Chris to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, 3 consecutive life sentences for the murders, plus 2 additional life sentences for the murder of a child under 12 and the unlawful termination of a pregnancy, along with 48 years for tampering with the bodies. Sarah listened as the judge described the brutality of the crime, calling it one of the most inhumane acts he had ever seen. When Chris was given a chance to speak, he offered a brief apology, saying he was sorry for the pain he caused, but Sarah found his words hollow, unable to erase the image of what he had done to his own family. She left the courtroom in tears, grappling with the finality of the sentence, knowing Chris would never be free again, yet feeling no sense of relief from the justice served. Michael had been working tirelessly since Chris's arrest, collaborating with the Weld County District Attorney's Office to build an airtight case. By September 2018, the evidence against Chris was overwhelming. Security footage showing Shanann's last moments, GPS data placing Chris at Service 319 on the morning of the murders, and the recovery of the bodies, which confirmed the cause of death as strangulation for Shanann and smothering for Bella and Celeste. Michael also uncovered text messages between Chris and Nicole Kessinger, revealing the affair and Chris's desire to start a new life with her, a motive that became central to the prosecution's narrative. Despite Chris's initial claim that Shanann had killed the girls, forensic evidence showed no signs of her involvement, and Michael knew Chris was the sole perpetrator, a fact he was determined to prove in court. In late October 2018, Michael met with prosecutors to discuss the plea deal, a decision made to avoid the emotional toll of a trial on Shanann's family. The deal required Chris to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for removing the death penalty from consideration, a compromise Michael supported, knowing it would guarantee a life sentence without parole. On November 6, 2018, Michael sat in the courtroom as Chris entered his guilty plea, a moment that brought a sense of relief, though the weight of the case remained heavy. He watched as Shanann's family spoke, their grief palpable, and felt a renewed sense of purpose in ensuring the legal process honored their loss. The sentencing on November 19, 2018, was a somber day for Michael, who listened as the judge handed down the maximum sentence, a punishment that reflected the severity of Chris's actions, a punishment Michael had worked hard to secure. After the sentencing, Michael received a call from investigators in Wisconsin, where Chris had been transferred to Dodge Correctional Institution for his safety due to the high-profile nature of the case. They informed him that Chris had agreed to a follow-up interview, scheduled for November 29, 2018, to provide a full confession. During the interview, Chris admitted to killing all 3 victims, revealing that he strangled Shanann in their bedroom after an argument about their failing marriage, then smothered Bella and Celeste shortly after. He described placing the girls' bodies in the oil tanks to hide them, a detail that matched the evidence Michael had already gathered. The confession provided closure to some unanswered questions, but it also deepened Michael's understanding of Chris's cold, calculated nature, a realization that stayed with him as he moved forward with his career. Laura had been covering the Watts case daily since the disappearance, her articles at the Denver Post becoming a primary source of information for the public. In September 2018, she published a detailed piece on the charges against Chris, outlining the evidence that had led to his arrest, including the security footage, GPS data, and the recovery of the bodies at Survey 319. Her reporting highlighted the inconsistencies in Chris's initial story, particularly his claim that Shanann had killed the girls, a claim that forensic evidence quickly disproved. Laura interviewed experts in criminal psychology who suggested Chris's affair with Nicole Kessinger and his desire for a fresh start were likely motives, a perspective she included in her coverage to provide context for her readers. On November 6, 2018, Laura attended the plea hearing, taking notes as Chris admitted his guilt. She wrote a comprehensive article that evening, describing the courtroom atmosphere and the emotional statements from Shanann's family, particularly Frank's tearful plea for justice. The sentencing on November 19, 2018, was another pivotal moment for Laura, who reported on the judge's harsh words and the life sentences handed down to Chris. She also covered the reactions from the Frederick community, interviewing neighbors who expressed relief that the case had concluded, though the pain of the loss lingered. When Chris's full confession was released after his November 29th interview, Laura published a follow-up piece, detailing his admission to all 3 murders and his description of the events, a confession that solidified the public's understanding of the case, a story Laura had dedicated herself to telling with accuracy and respect. By December 2018, the legal proceedings had concluded, leaving Chris Watts to serve his life sentences in a Wisconsin prison. Sarah began the slow process of grieving, attending therapy to cope with the betrayal and loss, determined to honor Shanann and the girl's memory in her own way. Michael returned to his regular duties at the Frederick Police Department, the case leaving a permanent mark on his career, a reminder of the importance of seeking justice for victims. Laura continued her work at the Denver Post, her coverage of the Watts case earning her recognition as a journalist committed to truth, a role she would carry forward as the story's impact lingered in Frederick and beyond. From December 2018 to late 2021, the aftermath of Chris Watts' sentencing left a lasting impact on Frederick, Colorado, and beyond. Sarah Watts struggled to rebuild her life while grappling with the loss of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, and the betrayal of her brother. Detective Michael Brooks reflected on the case's effect on his career and the community, advocating for better domestic violence resources. Laura Bennett continued her reporting at the Denver Post, covering Chris's prison life and the broader societal discussions on mental health and family violence that the case sparked. The tragedy's shadow lingered, shaping the lives of Sarah, Michael, and Laura as they each sought ways to honor the memory of the victims and move forward. Sarah had been attending therapy weekly since Chris's sentencing in November 2018, trying to process the immense grief and guilt she felt as his sister. By December 2018, Chris had been transferred to Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin for his safety, a move Sarah learned about through the news. She had no desire to speak with him, the pain of his actions still raw, but she received updates from her parents, who occasionally visited him. They told her Chris was struggling to adjust to prison life, often isolated due to the high-profile nature of his crime, a reality Sarah found little comfort in. She focused instead on her relationship with Shanann's family, particularly her parents, Frank and Sandra Rzusek, who had moved to North Carolina to be closer to their surviving son, Frankie. Sarah visited them often, bringing small gifts for Shanann's memorial, a space filled with photos of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, a place where Sarah could mourn alongside those who understood her loss. In 2020, Sarah decided to channel her grief into action, joining a local support group for families affected by violent crimes. She began speaking at community events in Denver, sharing her story to raise awareness about the warning signs of domestic violence, a topic she wished she had understood before the tragedy. Through these events, she met other survivors who had lost loved ones, forming a network of support that helped her heal. By late 2021, Sarah had started a small foundation in Shanann's name, aimed at providing resources for victims of domestic abuse, a project that gave her a sense of purpose, though the memories of Bella and Celeste's laughter during her visits to Frederick still brought tears to her eyes. She knew healing would be a lifelong journey, but she was determined to honor her sister-in-law and nieces by ensuring their deaths led to meaningful change. Michael had returned to his regular duties at the Frederick Police Department by December 2018, but the Watts case remained a defining moment in his career. The brutality of the crime, Chris murdering his pregnant wife and young daughters, stayed with him, prompting him to reflect on how law enforcement could better address domestic violence. In early 2019, Michael began working with local advocacy groups to improve training for officers on recognizing signs of abuse, using the Watts case as a reference point. He learned that Shanann had confided in friends about Chris's growing distance, a red flag that went unnoticed until it was too late. Michael pushed for better community outreach programs in Frederick, ensuring victims had access to resources before situations escalated, a mission that became a cornerstone of his work in the years following the case. By 2021, Michael had been promoted to a supervisory role at the department, a position that allowed him to implement some of the changes he advocated for. He organized workshops with social workers and counselors, training officers to handle domestic violence calls with greater sensitivity, a change that led to an increase in reports, as more victims felt safe coming forward. Michael also kept in touch with Shanann's family, attending a memorial event they held in North Carolina in 2020, where he spoke briefly about the importance of community vigilance. The event was emotional for him, a reminder of the lives lost, but also a testament to the resilience of Shanann's loved ones. He felt a sense of pride in the work he had done to secure justice for them, though he knew the pain of the case would never fully leave him, a constant motivator to protect others in his community. Laura had been deeply affected by the Watts case, her reporting at the Denver Post evolving as she followed the aftermath of Chris's sentencing. In December 2018, she published an in-depth article on Chris's transfer to Wisconsin, detailing his adjustment to prison life based on information from prison officials. She learned that Chris had been placed in protective custody due to threats from other inmates, a common occurrence for high-profile offenders. Laura also interviewed a psychologist who analyzed Chris's behavior, suggesting he exhibited narcissistic traits, a perspective that added depth to her coverage of his motives. Her readers remained engaged, many reaching out to share their own experiences with domestic violence, prompting Laura to focus more of her work on the topic in the years that followed. In 2021, Laura produced a series of articles on the societal impact of the Watts case, exploring how it had sparked discussions on mental health and family violence across the country. She interviewed experts who noted that the case highlighted the dangers of untreated emotional issues in men, particularly in high-stress family dynamics. Laura also covered Shanann's family's efforts to raise awareness, including their advocacy for stronger domestic violence laws in Colorado, a cause that gained traction after the case received national attention. By late 2021, Laura had started working on a documentary project about the case, collaborating with the production team to tell Shanann, Bella, and Celeste's story in a way that honored their memory, a project that allowed her to reflect on her role in bringing their story to the public and the responsibility she felt to continue advocating for change. By late 2021, the long shadow of the Watts case continued to influence Frederick and beyond. Sarah had found a way to turn her grief into action, using her foundation to support others while keeping Shanann and the girl's memory alive. Michael had made significant strides in improving domestic violence response in his community, a legacy of the case that he hoped would prevent future tragedies. Laura's reporting had evolved into a platform for advocacy, her work ensuring that the lessons of the Watts case reached a wider audience, a reminder of the importance of addressing the underlying issues that can lead to such devastating outcomes. From late 2021 to April 12, 2025, the legacy of the Chris Watts case continued to resonate in Frederick, Colorado, and beyond, shaping the lives of those touched by the tragedy. Sarah Watts worked to honor Shanann, Bella, and Celeste through advocacy, finding a path to healing despite her brother's actions. Detective Michael Brooks used the case's lessons to improve law enforcement practices, ensuring better protection for potential victims. Laura Bennett expanded her journalism into a platform for change, documenting Chris's prison life and the societal shifts the case inspired. The Watts family murders left an indelible mark, a reminder of the importance of addressing domestic violence and mental health, a legacy that Sarah, Michael, and Laura each contributed to in their own way. Sarah had spent the years since Chris's sentencing in 2018 trying to rebuild her life, a process that remained challenging even by late 2021. Her foundation, established in Shanann's name, had grown into a recognized nonprofit by 2022, offering support groups and resources for domestic violence survivors in Colorado. Sarah traveled across the state to speak at events, sharing her story to educate others on the warning signs she wished she had recognized in Chris's behavior. In 2023, she partnered with a local university to create a scholarship fund for students pursuing social work degrees, a tribute to Shanann's passion for helping others, a project that brought Sarah closer to Shanann's family, particularly her brother Frankie, who had become a vocal advocate for victims' rights. By April 2025, Sarah had expanded her foundation's reach, launching an online platform with resources for survivors nationwide, a milestone that gave her a sense of purpose, though the pain of losing Shanann and the girls never fully faded. In her personal life, Sarah had started a new tradition to honor Bella and Celeste, hosting a small memorial gathering each August on the anniversary of their deaths. She invited Shanann's family and close friends to her home in Denver, where they shared memories and lit candles for the girls, a ritual that helped Sarah feel connected to them. She also maintained a distant but civil relationship with her parents, who continued to visit Chris in prison, though Sarah had not spoken to him since his sentencing. In early 2025, Sarah learned through a news report that Chris had reportedly found religion in prison, spending much of his time reading the Bible and corresponding with pen pals, a development she didn't know how to feel about, choosing instead to focus on her advocacy work, which she believed was the best way to honor the memory of those she had lost. Michael had been reflecting on the Watts case's impact on his career since late 2021, using his position at the Frederick Police Department to advocate for systemic change. In 2022, he spearheaded a statewide initiative in Colorado to improve domestic violence training for law enforcement, a program that incorporated lessons from the Watts investigation, such as the importance of recognizing emotional withdrawal as a potential red flag. The initiative led to new protocols, including mandatory follow-ups on domestic disturbance calls and better coordination with social services, changes that Michael saw make a tangible difference in his community. By 2024, the program had been adopted by several other states, earning Michael recognition from the Colorado Department of Public Safety, a moment of pride that he dedicated to Shanann and her daughters. By April 2025, Michael had retired from the police department after 30 years of service, a decision he made to spend more time with his family, though he remained active as a consultant on domestic violence prevention. He often thought about the Watts case, particularly the moment he saw Bella and Celeste's bodies being recovered from the oil tanks, an image that never left him. In retirement, Michael started writing a memoir about his career, with a significant portion dedicated to the Watts investigation, aiming to share the lessons he had learned with a broader audience. He also kept in touch with Shanann's family, sending them a message each year on the anniversary of the murders, a small gesture to let them know he hadn't forgotten their loss, a commitment that defined his legacy as an officer. Laura had continued her in-depth coverage of the Watts case at the Denver Post, focusing on its long-term effects by late 2021. In 2022, her documentary on the case, A Family Betrayed, was released, featuring interviews with Shanann's family, Michael, and experts on domestic violence, a project that received critical acclaim and brought renewed attention to the tragedy. The documentary highlighted the societal factors that contributed to the crime, such as the stigma around men seeking mental health support, a topic Laura explored further in a series of articles published in 2023. She interviewed psychologists who pointed out that Chris's inability to address his emotional struggles likely played a role in his actions, a perspective that resonated with her readers and sparked discussions on social media. In 2024, Laura traveled to Wisconsin to report on Chris's life in prison, gaining rare access to information through a source at Dodge Correctional Institution. She learned that Chris had been moved to a different cell block for security reasons, spending most of his days in isolation, though he had developed a small circle of correspondents, including women who wrote to him after seeing the case on television. Laura's article on the subject, published in early 2025, sparked controversy, with many readers expressing outrage that Chris was receiving attention from admirers, a phenomenon Laura analyzed through the lens of true crime fascination. By April 2025, Laura had transitioned to a freelance role, focusing on advocacy journalism, using the Watts case as a foundation to explore broader issues of family violence, a path that allowed her to continue honoring Shanann, Bella, and Celeste through her work. By April 12, 2025, the legacy of the Chris Watts case had become a permanent part of Frederick's history, a reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked domestic issues. Sarah had turned her grief into a force for good, her foundation providing hope to survivors across the country. Michael had left a lasting impact on law enforcement practices, ensuring better protection for those at risk, a testament to his dedication to justice. Laura's journalism had evolved into a platform for change, her work keeping the conversation alive, ensuring that the lessons of the Watts case continued to influence society, a legacy that honored the memory of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, a legacy that would endure. As of April 2025, the Chris Watts case remains a somber reminder of the hidden dangers within families, a tragedy that claimed the lives of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and unborn Nico in 2018. Sarah Watts, now 40, continues her advocacy through the foundation she established in Shanann's name, reaching thousands of domestic violence survivors across the United States. She has become a recognized speaker, often invited to conferences to share her insights, a role that allows her to honor her sister-in-law and nieces while helping others escape dangerous situations. Sarah's work has saved lives, a legacy she holds dear, though she still visits Shanann's memorial each year, a quiet moment to reflect on the family she lost. Detective Michael Brooks, now retired, published his memoir in early 2025, a book that details his career and the Watts investigation's profound impact on his life. The memoir, titled Shadows of Justice, became a resource for law enforcement training programs, emphasizing the need for better domestic violence response protocols. Michael donates a portion of the proceeds to victim support organizations, a way to give back to the community that shaped his career. He often thinks of Shanann and her daughters, their memory a driving force behind his continued advocacy, a commitment to ensuring such tragedies are prevented through vigilance and education. Laura Bennett, now a freelance journalist, released a follow-up documentary in March 2025, Echoes of Loss, which explored the Watts case's societal impact over the past 7 years. The documentary highlighted the increased focus on mental health support for men and the expansion of domestic violence resources in Colorado, changes partly inspired by the case's visibility. Laura's work has earned her awards for advocacy journalism, a recognition of her dedication to amplifying victims' voices. She remains in contact with Shanann's family, ensuring their story continues to inspire change, a mission that defines her career and keeps the memory of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste alive. The Watts case, though a dark chapter, has sparked meaningful progress, from policy reforms to personal healing journeys. Sarah, Michael, and Laura have each played a role in transforming their grief and outrage into action, ensuring that the tragedy serves as a catalyst for awareness and prevention. As the years pass, the lessons of August 2018 endure, a call to recognize the signs of danger, to support those in need, and to honor the lives lost by building a safer future for others.